today. The Knights Templar. Who were they? What were the real secrets of the Templars? The most enduring mystery surrounding the Knights Templar concerns the nature and final resting place of their great treasure. Whereas many believe this lost treasure contains knowledge of the holy bloodline, including the whereabouts of its descendants, William F. Mann shows that it may in part consist of an ancient science developed before the Great Flood, one to guide the Templars in the Holy Land during the Crusades. Still extant in Masonic Templar ritual today, this knowledge enabled the Templar order to establish accurate latitudinal and longitudinal positions long before the 17th century, when the foundations of this geographic science were laid. It is allowed that the Templars crossed the Atlantic, New World, where, led by Prince Henry Sinclair, they established both secret settlements to protect the descendants of the Merovingian dynasty and mining operations that gave them a limitless supply of precious metals and a military edge over their opponents. William Mann, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you, William. Thank you very much.
This is a very exciting adventure that you've embarked upon. Is this your third or your fourth book now about the Templars?
Actually, it's my third book. We started there was my first book, The Labyrinth of the Grail. The second one is The Knights Templar in the New World. And the Templar Meridians, the secret mapping of the New World, is a natural extension of those first two.
Yeah, and this is such a kind of a departure from the usual Templar sort of books that tend to focus more on the Holy Land, or they'll take you to Rennes-le-Château, France, for example, or up to Rosslyn Chapel. But you're in a very unique position to talk about the Templars, especially their North American connections, because of your family background. Why don't we start there and talk with everybody about how you became interested in the Templars and why you have such unique insight into their treasure and their secrets?
Well, in part, William, it's an interesting story that I continue through my three books because it really started with my family background. My great-uncle, who was like my grandfather to me because my grandfather had died just prior to me being born, I find out approximately 15 years ago was Supreme Grand Master Knights Templar of Canada. And it's been conveyed to me since that time that in actual fact he was probably one of the three highest-ranking Freemasons in the world. And it was through some of the secrets that he showed to me, unbeknown to myself at the time when I was really quite young, that I've been able to piece together the story and really develop a really interesting tale of daring on behalf of one Prince Henry St. Clair who came to the New World in 1398 AD. But more importantly, it's been a real personal journey. It's allowed me to really piece together a family background that I knew a little bit about. But since the time that I started doing a fair amount of research over the last 15 years, I've really been exposed to a number of things on a variety of levels, which just have simply amazed me on a personal level and from a knowledge point of view.
And I assume you've had an opportunity to travel to some of the Templar locations, and if so, where has your journey taken you, and what did you experience when you were at these places?
My journey has taken me around the world. One of the most amazing places, obviously, is the Rosslyn Chapel. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be very much aware of Rosslyn Chapel because of its significance through the Da Vinci Code. To me, the most amazing thing, though, is not the places that I've been. I've been to Brazil, I've been to South America, to Africa, all through Europe, to Scotland, to the Orkneys. One of the most amazing things, though, that I've experienced is the gentlemen that I've been allowed to meet through the story that I've been telling and through my family connection. Some of these amazing gentlemen, 80 years old, amazing memory for the knowledge that I'm conveying, amazing truths in terms of my family background, and just a kindness that they've demonstrated to me. That, to me, is the real treasure, William.
Would one of these kindly gentlemen, these scholarly gentlemen, happen to bear the surname of Sinclair?
He does indeed. Niven Sinclair has become one of my best friends, and Niven Sinclair has really been the catalyst to this whole story of Prince Henry Sinclair from an old world point of view. Niven himself has become an amazing friend in part because of the story that I've told and brought Prince Henry Sinclair over to the New World. And my new book, Templar Meridians, continues with the story of bringing Prince Henry Sinclair to the interior North America and intermixing him with the native population, the First Nations, the Aboriginals. Because in part the story wouldn't really have continued if it wasn't for this introduction or strategic intermarriages of the Knights Templar that we're talking about around 1400 with the First Nations. So it's really in part a story about the First Nations also of North America.
Yeah, and with that, you get into some of the real kind of crevices, if you will, of American history, stuff that's little known. For example, Thomas Jefferson had a very deep and enduring interest in both the secrets of the New World as well as the esoteric secrets of the Old World. And it's something that most Americans simply are not that aware of. But still, we need to just, if you wouldn't mind, William, cover a couple of bases. Let's talk just for a moment more about Henry Sinclair and why understanding his story is so important to a true and accurate understanding of American history.
If you understand the true story of Prince Henry Sinclair at the end of the 14th century was hereditary Grand Master of Knights Templar of Scotland. Now, the Knights Templar of Scotland, for anybody who knows their history around that time, the Knights Templar were the ancestors of those original knights that fought in the First Crusades in the Holy Land. The story goes that they discovered something under the Temple of Solomon, something of immense value, to the point that they were followed or pursued to the ends of the earth by the church and French king. On Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th, 1307, it all came together when Prince Philippe the Fair of France made a lightning strike on all the Templars of France. Those Templars dispersed, and legend has it that those Templars were responsible for the Scottish victory over the English at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Now, the interesting thing is that the Sinclairs are intermixed with that history, but just as importantly, they were supposedly the guardians of this ancient knowledge or ancient treasure, which had been transported from the Holy Land, from the First Crusades and the original 9 Knights. And it was Prince Henry Sinclair, when the English were getting too close for comfort, through this ancient knowledge, was able to transport what they considered to be the Holy Grail to the New World, to their new Arcadia, as they viewed it at that point in time, but what in the actual fact is present-day Nova Scotia.
So these secrets that came out of the crypt, the repository of secrets beneath Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, made their way to America. You know, it's kind of interesting, William, USA Today and Good Morning America have gotten together to come up with the 7 new wonders of the world. And, of course, the Dome of the Rock is on this list. And so it just seems that for some reason that particular dot of real estate is considered to be sacred not only in the ancient world but continues right up to today. But most people, like American history, just simply do not know the actual history of Jerusalem, of the Holy City, and of the Temple Mount itself. I'm a big fan of Zechariah Sitchin's work on, especially his analysis of the Temple Mount. He claims that Solomon's Temple was built on a far more ancient platform and functioned as what he describes, he uses the Sumerian term Duranki, which means a bond between heaven and earth. And I know that you've spoken about this ancient knowledge possessed by the Templars and how it somehow made them a conduit between God and man. A conduit is a bond between heaven and earth. So let's talk just for a brief moment, and we'll talk about it in detail, about what potential secrets are we actually talking about at this dot of real estate that has been known for centuries as a bond between heaven and earth.
Well, it's interesting you described it as this bond between heaven and earth. To me, this is really what challenged the Roman Catholic Church at the time. The Templars practiced a Catharism type of knowledge that allowed the individual, through a higher level of knowledge and esoteric learning, to really connect with God or the Supreme Being. That obviously was a challenge to the Roman Catholic Church at that time, which preached that it was only through the church and only through your individual priest that could you reach that level. And so the Knights Templar, obviously, they were proposing a profound change to religion at that time, and you can see why they were pursued. You can see why they were hated by both church and state at the time. But the knowledge that they also possessed was one of a more physical nature, one that encased sacred, what is known as sacred geometry. Really, sacred geometry is the geometry that kids learn in high school today. But at that time, it would have been pure knowledge. It would have allowed the Knights Templar and other groups, other secret societies, virtually to circumnavigate the world at a time when the church was preaching that the world was flat and the ends of the earth were just beyond the rock of Gibraltar. To me, this was an immense knowledge which allowed them to use the New World and the New World resources through their friendship with the First Nations, those unlimited resources, those metals which would be used for weaponry, all of those things, all of those resources really made the Knights Templar the most powerful organization at the time. And to me, that's the real treasure. Now, a lot of people associate the treasure on another level. They see it, and thanks to Dan Brown, this is now being exposed to the world. They see it as being the holy bloodline, the direct connection.
The holy bloodline. We're going to continue with this subject with William Mann when we get back right after the break. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking with William Mann for our subscribers about the Templar treasure in the Americas and where it might be and what is it. Plus, William will be chatting live with subscribers so you can ask him your question.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with William Mann. William, just before the break, we started our conversation about the esoteric knowledge possessed by the Knights Templar. They seem to have had a direct conduit between God and man, and this made them a threat to the Catholic Church that presupposed themselves as that conduit. Just I'd like to add a thought that you find this later in the early 14th century with the invention of eyeglasses by an anonymous Italian inventor. That the church went ballistic with that invention because with the invention of eyeglasses came an idea. And the idea was that the human body is improvable. The church's position was, hey, if God wanted you to see, God would have given you a decent set of eyes. But it didn't happen. So who do you think you are to challenge God's ultimate wisdom? And so you can see that this is a really important kind of challenge to the church that the Templars are posing. They're saying not only do we have this esoteric knowledge, we have this profound knowledge about the resources of this planet and how to utilize them militarily, but now you seem to be saying they also had an even more profound and intense secret than that. So let's pick up with that and continue.
Well, we talked about the bond between heaven and earth. Think about it, William. There probably would be no stronger bond than that direct connection between Jesus Christ and being the Son of the Lord and the Supreme Being, God Himself, the Creator. The Knights Templar, on another level, I believe, were guardians of that holy bloodline. And the Sinclairs, Prince Henry Sinclair himself, was a member of that holy bloodline. And so in part, when we speak of the Holy Grail, not only we talk about that knowledge which allowed them to travel across the Atlantic Ocean to what they considered to be a sanctuary in the New World, but to establish a sanctuary for that holy bloodline. And this is where I think the story is quite important from all levels. A number of people ask me, what is the Holy Grail? What do you consider to be the Holy Grail? And I always say to them, what do you consider it to be? It can be dealt with on a variety of levels, but to me the most important thing, other than the ancient knowledge, was this continuation of the Holy Bloodline through the House of David, through Jesus Christ, and through the House of Benjamin being Mary Magdalene. Think about the power that Holy Bloodline would represent, that kindness, that gentleness, also that bloodline would represent. There would be a representative connection between heaven and earth itself.
Frankly speaking, William, I view him as a mutant race. I think if we're talking about Jesus as a divine being, semi-divine, a deity, Mary's a mortal woman, this is the continuation of a intermarriage between earth and sky, heaven and earth, that began way back in the Book of Genesis. And here we are with a new, even more profound revelation of this bloodline. And what we're talking about is potentially a new human race, a race of beings that possess the ability to manipulate matter, to operate on multi-dimensions, to express incredible healing capabilities. And yeah, absolutely, you're talking about a race that would have been a profound threat to any established religious authority, no matter at what time. And so if we look then to the Templars as the guardians of this secret, of this treasure, which many believe they symbolized by a skull, are we then talking actually, in addition to that bloodline, but also about a skill, a body of wisdom that was possessed by this family that certain religious authorities might have coveted as well?
Absolutely, and I think part of those skills would be relating to alchemy and medicine and really the arts and sciences. You talk about a mutant strain. I don't like to consider it to be a mutant strain, but I like to think about it as within that DNA there was a strain, certain markers which were representative of a small group, which through intermarriage they were able to keep the bloodline strong, but also what that bloodline represented. To me, the real message is that, again, I spoke earlier on about the kindness and gentleness of some of these older gentlemen that I've met, including my great uncles. I really think that this is what the bloodline represents: the kindness and gentleness and the good of the earth, really the balance, the evil within the earth. I'm not suggesting that the church represents that evil, but there were certain components within the church itself which represented or which recognized that the bloodline really represented a threat to the entire establishment of the church as we know it over the past 2,000 years. And this is why you have to remember that at one time, the Knights Templar, they were the Pope's personal bodyguards. They were the Pope's soldiers of Christ. What would have caused the church to turn so violently against them within 250 years from the First Crusade? They really possessed, logic tells us that they possessed something of a physical nature that represented a threat to the church's absolute power. And in part, that was that bloodline, that absolute connection or representation of that connection between heaven and earth. It also represented was represented by this ancient knowledge which allowed the Knights Templar to hide the bloodline in at what that time was considered to be a refuge or sanctuary. And through the Templar meridians, I've established that there's been a series of ancient meridians which have been rediscovered or discovered initially across North America, which allowed the Templars, as guardians of the bloodline, to continue that bloodline for centuries, probably to this very day, and to hide that bloodline within the indigenous peoples of North America.
And I love the term you used a moment ago, William, sanctuary of the holy bloodline. It makes perfect sense if, as you're describing, you have a group of beings, a family that essentially just wants to live out their lives in peace. They're not really wanting to cause revolutions or to really, in a sense, undertake the rulership of the world, even though that's a possibility. But still, they're looking for the most pleasing places on the planet to live. And I've been to Edinburgh before, and I have to tell you, it just seems like it's one of the most magical places that you could ever envision visiting. There's just an incredible energy there. And so it must have taken something incredibly powerful to pull Henry Sinclair away from the Edinburgh or the Scotland into the wilds of Nova Scotia. So let's talk now about what was established in Arcadia and how it came about that they were to focus on this place as the sanctuary for this holy bloodline.
I believe that they established virtually a lost settlement that I've been able to determine in Nova Scotia was based upon earlier Celtic settlement. When you think about the Celts, you can associate the Norse, you can associate even the Phoenicians with them. I believe that there were transatlantic trading routes already established in pre-Christian times, and that, in essence, Prince Henry Sinclair knew exactly where he was going in terms of being able to reestablish those settlements, not only in Nova Scotia, but across North America, of course, with the help of the Aboriginals. But what's really intriguing is that the Knights Templar, you have to remember that they were not only a religious order, but a military order. They, I believe, established lines of communications across the entire world, whereby they were always 2 steps ahead of the church that was pursuing them to all ends of the earth. That, to me, is incredible in itself. But you're right, to leave Edinburgh and to leave Roslyn Castle and the Orkneys, which has a real mystery and a real sense of place in itself, and to come to the wilderness of North America, you would have to know exactly where you're going and have to have ultimate confidence in yourself and in God to be able to establish these settlements and to thrive in the nature as they did, but also to wake up every day to be wary that you were being pursued and that there was a possibility that there would be sails on the horizon any day, and sails that really carried a vengeance unknown to man before that time. Remember that it was the Spanish Inquisition that was established by the church, in essence, to torture the Templars to find these secrets. So to me, there was an intense danger, but to realize some sanctuary or refuge of the nature that they did in Nova Scotia to them must have been like heaven on earth.
William, one of the biggest clues that you discussed comes from the enigmatic painting by the great artist Nicolas Poussin called The Shepherds of Arcadia.
That's correct.
Let's introduce the audience to this incredible painting and why it's so important in your investigation.
Well, this painting was painted in circa 1640-42 by Nicolas Poussin, a court painter in France. But interesting enough, in my researches, I find that the specific instructions for this painting were given to Poussin by none other than Cardinal Richelieu. And it was Richelieu who established the company of 100 associates in New France. Richelieu, I believe, had access to many parts of this story, and he was like a double agent. On one hand, he was pursuing the bloodline for his own purposes. But on the other hand, I believe that Richelieu was deflecting also inquiry by the royal French houses with regards to this bloodline. Richelieu, on one hand, wanted everything for himself, but on the other hand, he was providing clues to Poussin because he didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. And what Poussin did is arrange this painting of these 4 figures, these 4 shepherds of Arcadia, which in many levels presented or gave a series of clues, not only relating to sacred geometry, but pinpointing the exact location in Nova Scotia that I was able to determine where this secret settlement was maintained for at least 300 years.
A secret settlement for the bloodline of the Holy Grail. When we get back from the break, we're going to continue with William Mann talking about Poussin and the other secrets that this man possessed. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber. For our subscribers, I'm going to be talking to William Mann about the Master of the Key, who said he was a Canadian. William Mann is very well placed to speculate with me on what that might mean, and may have a very deep and extraordinary meaning.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with William Mann. William, just before the break, we started talking about this incredible mystic painter, Nicolas Poussin, and how he led you to virtually X marks the spot, the location where this holy bloodline was to find its refuge in the new, the New Jerusalem, or the sanctuary of the holy bloodline, as you call it. Many of the researchers who talk about Poussin connect his painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, more with Rennes-le-Château, France, in southern France, than they do with Nova Scotia. How were you able then to build that bridge between what most scholars or researchers think about Poussin's painting and what you've been able to discover?
Well, interesting enough, William, if you go back to what we were talking about originally about my family connection, it was through a secret ring that was shown to me by my great-uncle, Frederick George.
For real, an actual secret ring?
An actual ring. What you would have to, how it's described is, it would be the ring of the Supreme Grand Master.
Wow.
And it had a hidden compartment. And within that hidden compartment was a symbol. And essentially that symbol represented, unknown to me at that time, because I was quite young, it was the Vesica Piscis with the Star of David centered within the center of the two rings. For some reason, about 12 years ago, I was reading a book by Michael Bradley, which was one of the first that talked about this possible voyage of Prince Henry St. Clair coming to the New World in 1398. For some reason, I made the connection one evening, sat up in bed while reading this book, went to my study, and was able to apply on a physical level the application of that, let's call it sacred geometry, that symbol, to Nova Scotia. Don't ask me how, but I found that the symbology or the representative symbol fit exactly to the mainland of Nova Scotia. And it was through my through further researches, I could apply that to Masonic allegory, moral allegory, in a way that I pinpointed on a two-dimensional map, stuck a pin, virtually a needle in the haystack, on an area in the wilderness of Nova Scotia. My wife is from Nova Scotia, and the next summer we went down. I walked through the woods and rediscovered remnants of this settlement. Given some of my background, I was able to recognize that there were certain structures that had been developed. And I uncovered a number of stones in that nature which had Celtic symbols and Masonic symbols carved on them. So I was surprised as anyone that I could do this. And following that, obviously I was quite intrigued to the point that since that time, I've immersed myself in esoteric layers of learning to the point I've been able to establish not only is the settlement in Nova Scotia centered on one of these longitudinal meridians, but there's a pattern of these longitudinal meridians that can be continued across North America. And even to my surprise, I was able to relate the diaries of Lewis and Clark and their journeys to this positioning of these longitudinal meridians. So you spoke about the interaction of Thomas Jefferson and some of the earlier presidents following the Revolution in the United States. I believe that, in a way, little pieces of these Masonic clues were given to some of the highest-ranking American Masons in the 18th and 19th century. And it was through Thomas Jefferson's instructions that Lewis and Clark, on one level, were searching for the remnants of these earlier Templar settlements, which had been established across North America in the 1400s.
You know, one reason that I really enjoy your work so much, William, is that it answers really interesting questions. Like, for example, what was Benjamin Franklin doing in southern France in June 1786 when archival documents from Bézieux and Roussillon and Carcassonne and other Templar preceptories were collated, and we find who is the now the head of these preceptories, who is the new Templar initiate? It's the super spy, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who was in France at that time, looking around, poking around Rennes-le-Château in this area where the Templars were operating. Then he comes back to the United States and he hooks up with his good friend Thomas Jefferson, and lo and behold, Jefferson is dispatching Lewis and Clark and Dunbar and Clark. They came right through Nashville here where I live with explicit instructions. Find my Celtic Druid ancestors. Where are their mounds? What's buried in them? And what's the military advantage to any of these locations? But I think that Jefferson was and Franklin must have been operating on similar sort of knowledge to what we're describing today. Would you agree?
They were. Absolutely. I think it's safe to say that both Franklin and Jefferson were being initiated into a number of the higher-level esoteric lodges. They're known as the Blue Lodges of France, and in many cases, the Blue Lodges are considered to be the lodges which practice those ancient degrees which have been continually practiced since ancient times, since before the flood. And it's, of course, over years you would lose a little bit of that knowledge, but there were snippets and clues. There was not one person that could put together the entire puzzle. Through attrition, through plague, through war, through death, through a number of events, some of these pieces of the puzzle were lost. But some of the other clues remained, specifically within Poussin's paintings, remained within the writings of Richelieu, remained within other things that were all brought together and that were handed over to Benjamin Franklin and to Thomas Jefferson, because there was the feeling that there was something within the New World, the new United States of America, in terms of the placement of these longitudinal meridians, as you say, within catches that were based upon major energy points which lay upon these meridians.
I run a parallel line of research to what you're doing, William. My deep interest in Poussin is in his painting Autumn, Grapes of the Promised Land. This is a story from the Book of Numbers where Joshua and Caleb were dispatched to Eshcol in Canaan, the Promised Land, and stole a cluster of oversized grapes and pomegranates from the sons of Anak, the offspring of the giants who dwelled there. And the inference that I've drawn is that what they actually stole from these giants were what we would consider to be the pre-flood secrets, the secrets that enabled one to enter what the Egyptians called the field of the blessed, or the dimension of the blessed, what the Greeks called the Elysian fields, and which is known in the Grail legends as the Isles of the Blessed. It seems that this is where we're starting to focus our research now, is that this whole big picture that these ancient researchers and spies were leaving for us is that we've got to steal this knowledge back from the authorities who have withheld it from us and utilize it for spiritual purpose to make us kinder, gentler beings. How do you feel about a proposition such as that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think that given the events that are happening right now around the world, I really think that there needs to be a rebalancing between good and evil, between black and white. And I think that right now many people are searching for exactly that. And I think that if you look at what's happening, especially through the Aboriginal, through some of the indigenous peoples, really what we're searching for is the reintroduction of the ancient teachings. And this is what Freemasonry is all about. This is what some of the higher levels within a variety of Masonic circles are all about. And as I say, it really wasn't a stealing. I think it was more that which was lost. And in Masonic terms, they refer to that which was lost. It's the ancient teachings. It's the traditional teachings from the First Nations. It's a balance of life, and it's a balance of nature, which we really need to reintroduce at this point in time, or as I'm sure that you would agree, we're heading towards disaster. And in a manner, it's those secrets which have been lost from the original times. When you speak about all those things, it's a clue in itself. They all had a common origin, and that common origin was another society, a secret society, or during another time before the flood. Those ancient teachings were practiced on an everyday level. And to me, that's the real message to the entire story, that we have to get back to those traditional teachings or we're heading towards ruin.
Yeah, we're just simply so far removed from our natural habitat that we don't even know what the feeling of relaxation feels like. What does it feel like to be deeply and ultimately relaxed? The closest I get is when you see my chiropractor and he does acupuncture on me, and I was amazed the first time it happened that my body could produce that kind of a deep relaxation simply by having little needles stuck in parts of my body. And it's a very subtle kind of a concept that what we want to get back to is our original consciousness, a consciousness where we are feeling as if we're connected with the higher vibrational energies at all time, and in a space to use there is no better word, where we're in a state of love at all times. Have you found Templar secrets that enable us to begin to access these deep reservoirs of the spiritual capability within us?
Let me just say, I think I found some of those secrets, in part because of my family background in itself. Think about it in terms of the holy bloodline, the Grail bloodline. If there are family members out there that can achieve that higher level because of certain mutations within their blood or developed consciousness, to me, there's a power in that. If we need somebody through a Grail bloodline to help us with those teachings, so be it. But to me, you can achieve individually. Anybody can achieve those levels if they essentially practice the kindness and gentleness that I spoke of before, that some of these older gentlemen that I've been introduced to really exhibit to me. There's a kindness in this world that really, I think, that should be reintroduced to the general population. I find that, as you mentioned, society is such now that we're so pent up and so stressed up trying to deal with everyday life that we really need to step away for a while and to try to understand. And these are something that the Templars practice every day of their life also. They were connected along with their religious bodies, the Cistercian monks. They practice an awareness of nature, of Earth's energy forces that we've lost. And to me, that's the shame of it all. And this is something that we should be recognizing and that we should moving back toward.
The book is called The Templar Meridians, The Secret Mapping of the New World. We're talking with William Mann, and we're going to continue our conversation with William right after the break. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking to William Mann about gateways to other universes and the possibility that they always stand open and that it takes hidden knowledge to find them, but that we may be able to gain this knowledge now or very soon. Join us, become an unknowncountry.com subscriber. William Mann will be chatting live with our subscribers so you can ask him your own question.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with William Mann, author of The Templar Meridians, The Secret Mapping of the New World. William, one of the things that I love so much about your book is that you've pretty well given an American, if they're looking for a summer vacation, they can kind of start in Nova Scotia and work their way west, hitting some very key Templar sites. So in this segment, I was hoping we might be able to kind of map out a Templar journey, beginning, say, with Oak Island, Nova Scotia, and moving our way out west, even as far as Tempe, Arizona. So let's begin then with Oak Island. What's at Oak Island? Why is it so important, and what does it mean to you?
Well, Oak Island, interesting enough, is based on some of the earlier Masonic legends, and it speaks about the underground vaults and certain treasures that can be found in those vaults. And a lot of people associate those vaults or those caves as being underneath Solomon's temple. And to me, though, the moral of the story is that you have to continually look beyond. You have to follow the meridian from east to west. So Oak Island, in my mind, it may have been used as a treasure depository at one time, but it really doesn't contain the true Templar treasure. It's been actually used as a ruse to prevent people from coming ashore to North America, which is in itself, if you know the black humor of the Templars must be, if we can use the analogy, sitting in heaven laughing at everybody, because only to the uninitiated would Oak Island contain the treasure. So moving beyond that, you have to move to the mainland. And you can start with the settlement that I identified within the wilderness at Green Oaks, Nova Scotia. And then knowing that in ancient times, 400, 500 years ago, still the waterways of North America were used as the highways. And following the old ancient Indian trails, we would find that we would move next to meridians that were established along Montreal, the old city of Montreal. At that time, Montreal was founded by the Knights Templar, along with the Sulpicians. Then moving forward, we could move to an area that I live in, Oakville, Ontario, Canada. In this area, it follows the Niagara Escarpment, a major, at this point, world biosphere, but a major energy source running north-south. And then the next thing we do, we can move across the Great Lakes, the ancient Indian waterways towards Chicago. And there's a lovely place on the east side of Chicago called Oak Park. And this is where somebody like a Frank Lloyd Wright would recognize the energies given off by one of these meridians, to the point that Frank Lloyd Wright, a lot of his earlier work was centered upon the meridians in Oak Park. Then as we make our way across the mid-eastern states to what I consider to be one of the most important of the meridians, and that meridian is, as you noted, William, is centered on Tempe, Arizona. Tempe, Temple, Arizona. If you continue that, running along that north-south meridian, we find that it runs through Salt Lake City and up through Montana and up through the foothills of Alberta. And really, it also establishes a point in time where Lewis and Clark made a major deviation from their journey. And they spent, if you read the Lewis and Clark diaries, they spent 56 days along this meridian. For what purpose? Lewis and Clark were searching for something of great importance. And I believe it to be either the last settlement or even the bones of Prince Henry St. Clair.
Interesting.
I believe that Prince Henry St. Clair, story tells us that Prince Henry St. Clair went back and was killed by the English in 1402. I've now confirmed, specifically through our friend Niven St. Clair, that Prince Henry St. Clair, with the help of the Aboriginals, the First Nations, moved inland to reestablish the energy through this ancient meridian grid. And I believe that Prince Henry St. Clair, his remains lie along this ancient meridian that runs through Tempe, Arizona, and up through Montana at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And there's another painting by David Teniers of St. Peter and St. Paul that I've been able to demonstrate that this grid pattern lies within that painting, and the clues were given to this painter also, like Nicholas Poussin, and that it really can pinpoint where those remains of Prince Henry St. Clair and the major catch and the major treasure of the Knights Templar still lies.
You know, it's been my experience, William, that the further you push west in archaeological explorations in America, especially following these meridians or rose lines, as you call them, the more you connect with some of the most bizarre stories you can ever hear. You You mentioned Oak Creek Canyon near Sedona as a location. You talk about these places in the Four Corners area. I've had an opportunity over the past few years to network with some people that they call it poking around. And what it is this is a group of people that have grown up in southern Utah, northwestern Arizona, and these areas, northeastern Arizona, and they hear these legends of the ancients, and they hear the legends of giant beings, of 12 and 14-foot tall skeletons that are laid out on crystalline slabs in underground crypts, and they hear all of these incredible treasure stories, and it just makes me wonder if the Templars were also interested in some of these grave sites and some of the knowledge that would correspondingly go along with these grave sites. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, William. Think about it. The Templars were not the first. The Templars were following the footsteps of those who came before them. We could be talking about the Norse giants. We could be talking about it. Legend really has, when you think about it, an origin. There's a true origin to myth and legend. And part of that origin, I'm sure, through oral history of the First Nations, although it's exaggerated, it spoke about these people that were among the First Nations. And really, when you think about the knowledge which allowed Prince Henry St. Clair and his Templars to come to the New World, I believe that there was an intermixing of all races thousands of years ago. But what allowed this intermixing was the kindness and gentleness and the respect of the individual. It wasn't. We didn't develop a warlike type of nation within the New World until the French, and I can say this because my mother's French. The French really came to New France and to Acadia at that time in the 1600s and introduced the warfare because what they were trying to do is they were trying to control the fur trade. Until the Europeans introduced the desire or the need for the fur trade, the Aboriginals pretty well lived in peace and harmony throughout the New World. And it was only through that European mentality that we start to experience 400 years ago that warlike mentality. And to me, there was other societies, other secret societies, which came before the Templars, which possessed this knowledge also, which reestablished this knowledge, and were able to use it to their advantage. And to me, in speaking with my native friends, the First Nations, what I'm finding is that the oral traditions of the First Nations are always mirror images of Masonic ritual. And that to me is the real key. There's a common origin to all of these stories. And there's a truth that we really have to rediscover.
And so in our time, it seems that we have an incredible opportunity here to once again grasp the forbidden secrets, to grasp the apple of wisdom and of knowledge. And I certainly want to thank you for sharing this opportunity with us, William, to explore these concepts with you. Before we go, I'd like to know, what are you up to now? What's your next project? Where's your interest taking you now?
Well, my interest is taking me now into my own family background. I'm finding through genealogical and DNA research that, in actual fact, that I'm a member of the Holy Bloodline myself,
interesting.
And that we've been able to trace my DNA back to the J2 haplogroup, and which really identifies specific markers which recognize the Kohan modal haplotype, which I'm sure some of your listeners will recognize, that it's specifically the Jewish priest class. And to me, this is starting to provide a number of answers as to why I'm able to really provide these connections where there's really no obvious connection between a number of facts and clues. And so my third book, my fourth book that I'm writing right now, speaks to this family connection. And really, it's always the question that I'm asking, why me? And again, we come back to these older gentlemen that say, never ask why. Just ask how. And I'm trying to understand my family connections and what those family connections really want me to accomplish, and try to understand why I've been able to do the things that I've been able to do at this point in time, but also to continue with this research and hopefully to rediscover those ancient teachings and to bring those ancient teachings forward in a coordinated manner with other groups where, for the benefit of the world, that we're able to re-achieve that balance between man and nature.
Well, once again, William, thank you very much for opening up this new dimension of understanding for us about not only the Holy Bloodline, but also about the original history of North America. We'll look forward to having you back on again soon.
Thank you very much.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
You're about to experience something that you just literally cannot get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts that others dare not. earthfiles.com. Today, she's reporting on NASA's plan for a permanent base on the moon and those incredible stories about there being water right now on Mars. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. NASA's longest-serving astronaut is John Young, who landed on the moon in 1972 with the Apollo 16 crew. In March of 2005, he was the keynote speaker at the Lunar and Planetary Institute conference in Houston. He told nearly 1,500 scientists and engineers from around the world, quote, NASA is in the deadly serious business of saving the human species. I think over this century, if we industrialize the moon and use its resources, I think it can save civilization. I think over the long haul, going to Mars will extend civilization. But I think the moon has the capability to save us, unquote. Those sobering words echoed behind this week's NASA announcement that the United States is headed back to the moon. This time, it's not only for orbits and brief visits. NASA says America will have a permanent manned moon base at one of the lunar poles by 2024, only 17 years from now. After that, it's on to Mars. Why the urgency now? Is it worry about Earth's future? I asked John Logsdon, Ph.D. and longtime director of the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs in Bethesda, Maryland.
The British cosmologist Stephen Hawking has been saying the same thing. Hawking says getting off the planet is necessary for the species to survive. The process of getting off the planet and establishing human outposts in other locations starts with the moon. It's basically our offshore island. And we can learn to live for long durations in hostile environments, get ready to go to other more distant destinations, and do a lot of interesting things on the moon.
Right now, we are coming up to New Year's Eve, changing from 2006 to 2007. And this announcement from NASA this week is suggesting that we are going to be putting robotic monitors on the moon in a year or so. And then the idea is that we would have astronauts there by 2020, which is only 13 years away. Why is there such an immediacy to going to the moon now and creating a permanent base?
Well, frankly, it seems to me like a long time, not a short time. After all, when President Kennedy in 1961 said, go to the moon before the decade is out, he was only allowing 9 years to accomplish it, and we did it in 8. So the fact that we're talking in the end of 2006 about being back on the moon with people in 14 years, to me, is a pretty long time frame. Why is it happening now? Well, there's a chain of events that start with the Columbia shuttle accident in February of 2003. And I was a member of the board that investigated that accident. And we were asked in our final report to write a little bit about the future. And we suggested that the American space program of human spaceflight had been drifting for 35 years without any clear goal or purpose. And the White House read our report, agreed with it, and President Bush decided to set some challenging new goals for the U.S. space program, and did that in a speech in January of 2004, in which he said, we're going to go to the moon, Mars, and beyond, with the first step being getting to the moon before 2020. That is the so-called vision for space exploration that's been driving NASA's preparations for the last 3 years.
Do you think that, honestly, part of the reason is the fact that India and Japan and China have been talking for the last 2 or 3 years seriously with plans of getting their own landers on the moon, and everybody is looking at the North and South Pole, especially the South Pole that has so much exposure to solar energy? Are we coming up against political fights over the territory of the South Pole?
I think the best way to think of it is like Antarctica, where there are scientific outpost stations of many nations in that continental-sized area. But the plans being talked about by India and Japan do not include sending people to the moon. If they're going to do that, they're going to do that in cooperation with some other country, and most likely with the United States. China is a bit of a wild card. There are some that think that China is embarked on a program that could lead to human missions to the moon sometime in the next 15 or 20 years. I myself am a bit of a skeptic on that. And the one country you didn't mention, which has the capability and potentially the will to do this, is Russia, which has a resurgent space program. So there is a slightly competitive environment in terms of planning both robotic and human missions to the moon. But a little competition is good for us.
How are we going to get the first phase of the robots and then manned space flight there in just a decade and a half?
We have existing expendable launch vehicles, rockets that you throw away each time you use them, that can launch all of the robotic probes that we are currently planning. None of them are very large pieces of equipment, so with existing rockets, there's no problem in launching the robotic missions that are precursor to the human landings. With respect to the human part of it, NASA has laid out a plan for developing a set of new hardware. 2 of those pieces of hardware, a new launch vehicle called Ares 1 and a new crew-carrying spacecraft called Orion, are under contract and beginning development, with the first flight somewhere in the 2012 to 2014 time period. When the shuttle is retired in 2010, the funds that are currently going to the shuttle will be used to develop a large launch vehicle equivalent to the Saturn V used for Apollo, and the lunar lander and the rocket stages to transport the Orion crew vehicle will carry the people to the moon. So the hardware plan has already been decided, and parts of it are well underway.
And if any of the other competing nations on the planet, such as Russia and India and Japan and China, start getting there before we do, is that feasible? And what do you think, from a Space Policy Institute point of view, might be the political problems over territory on the moon?
Well, let's start with the idea of territory on the moon. According to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and all of the countries you mentioned are signatories to that treaty, you cannot claim property. You cannot assert sovereignty on the moon or any other celestial body. So there is not an issue of planting the flag and saying this now belongs to country X, Y, or Z. There's going to have to be some coordination so that there isn't interference, And if there are economically productive activities that are found to be feasible on the moon, there are issues of property rights that have to be addressed. So there are some interesting policy issues that are associated with the intent to go back on a permanent basis and do things with not only scientific but economic value.
And helium-3, correct?
Helium-3 is one of the ideas of something of economic value. Your former senator living in Albuquerque now, Jack Schmidt, has been one of the leading advocates of the notion that helium-3 is an extremely valuable resource.
Could you explain how helium-3 might be mined and processed and applied to our planet?
Well, helium-3 could be used as fuel in a nuclear reactor based on basically the same process that creates energy from the sun. That is nuclear fusion, not breaking an atom, but driving two small atoms together. And helium is one of the lighter elements. So that particular isotope is the technical word, but that particular variety of helium, if the reactor existed, which it doesn't, could be a very valuable fuel. It would be non-polluting and relatively inexhaustible.
So what would you envision? That we would have fleets of some kind of transport vehicles that would be going to the moon and bringing helium-3 back to the Earth?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's the most likely valuable resource on the moon. To me, the most valuable resource is the high quantities of just plain oxygen that are embedded in the lunar soil. And if you can extract that, that's very good rocket fuel for journeys other places in the solar system. But the amount of helium-3 that would have to be recovered to fuel reactors on Earth is relatively small in both weight and volume. So it's not like a coal mining operation where there are big trains of coal coming from the mine to power plants. Probably one or two missions a year with relatively small volume could bring back enough helium-3.
And how do you envision what will happen between now as we go into 2007 and 2020? What will we be seeing be launched, and how will we go about setting up a permanent base on the moon at the south or the North Pole by 2024?
What will happen in the next several years is a series of robotic missions to the moon launched by India, by China, by Japan, by the United States, potentially by Italy, Germany, Europe, Russia. So kind of an armada of robotic missions gathering all the information that we need to plan for the human outposts on the moon. We'll also be developing and testing these new launch vehicles and the crew-carrying spacecraft with a first mission now kind of tentatively scheduled for 2018. And each time we send a mission up there, it will carry along a piece of the permanent outpost so that eventually you can assemble the pieces into a facility where people can stay up to 6 months at a time.
And is this what you mean and NASA means when you talk about this has to be an international effort, that the United States alone or any of these other countries alone could not create a permanent base, that with all the countries working together, they might be able to build one base?
Well, that's the idea, and there's both if you wish, a political element to it, that it would be better to do this as a cooperative global undertaking rather than as separate initiatives by a few countries. And the reality is no one country, and not even the United States, has the money to do this in full form by itself. So sharing the cost among many nations is a extremely useful and attractive idea.
But is it fair to say that in the future on the moon, over resources such as helium-3 and anything else that is discovered as useful might set up legal fights over ownership?
There is that possibility. I mean, this is akin to like a gold rush or an oil field discovery. It will not be governments. It'll be private companies that will lead this process of turning research results into actual industrial activities on the moon. There's lots of resources. I mean, the moon is a big place, and it's not like a one location where any of these potential resources would be located that people are going to fight over. But there are issues of ownership, of the ability to exploit non-terrestrial resources that lawyers are going to have to deal with.
For example, the Shackleton crater in the South Pole has about 80% solar energy on an ongoing basis, and I think that there are two places in the South Pole that may get up to 98% solar energy on a constant basis. And you would think that might present a territorial problem to these many nations wanting to go there and all needing energy.
The reality is that this is being planned as a cooperative global undertaking. And so the kind of issues that you were trying to suggest, I frankly reject as having any plausibility.
Well, the reason is the history of this planet seems to always be one in which humans end up fighting with each other and going to war over territory and issues as we're discussing.
Well, maybe we can, as we move off this planet, not carry that legacy with us and plan this as a cooperative undertaking from the start and try to avoid that kind of underlying conflict, which is not productive for anybody interested.
What is your personal thinking about why it is important for us to get to the moon and beyond onto Mars?
With the technological capability to go there, I think there's a certain sense of inevitability that at some point in history we will journey to these other destinations. If we can find their reasons to stay, we'll stay. It's entirely possible we could get there and say, gee, there's nothing here that we can use to live off the land, and we can't afford to bring everything from Earth all the time, and so we won't stay. But I think that's the least likely outcome. And then there is the underlying the species survival argument that at some point in the future, an asteroid or a comet will once again hit the Earth and cause large-scale extinctions, as happened 65 million years ago. And it would be good for humanity to be living in more than one place in the solar system if that were to occur.
And would we be able to use the same kind of equipment and spacecraft that we're going to develop to get to the moon over the next 13, 14 years? Can we use that same equipment to get to Mars, or do we have to develop yet a whole new technology?
No, the idea as these systems are being designed is that they are going to be useful for both going to the moon and going to Mars. Going to Mars is a long trip, and so you're going to need a larger spacecraft to carry the crew. But this big launch vehicle that we are developing, the so-called Ares 5, is sized for bringing enough weight into orbit to assemble a Mars spaceship. So unless there are some breakthroughs in propulsion, unless we get nuclear propulsion, which could cut down the travel time by 50 to 75%, I think the systems we're developing now are the systems that we will use to go to Mars.
Now, how will the astronauts, first on the moon and then on Mars, be able to live? What do you envision the structures will be that if we're having a permanent moon base? Will it be above ground, below ground, or what?
Well, it'll probably be halfway between, somewhat sunk into at least on the moon, the lunar regolith will be used for shielding. So it'll be, we're talking about something that's almost 20 years in the future, so the design will certainly, the specifics will certainly change, but you're going to need a closed environment because, after all, there is no air on the moon, so you're going to provide the life support and the shielding from radiation. And the best way to do that, as far as I have seen in the current plans, is, say, by some kind of Quonset hut-looking structures that will be shielded from radiation by the lunar soil. Mars, I think, is too far in the future to talk about permanent habitats there. I think we'll make some initial journeys to Mars to take a look around, but I think that the establishment of permanent outposts on the Martian surface is far, far in the future. I think the first outpost on the moon will be based on things we carry from the Earth, the habitat, the life support systems, the rovers, all of those capabilities. I think it's somewhat like the scientific outposts we have in Antarctica, which operate on a year-round basis. That all is equipment that has been moved there from other locations. So the notion is, at a rate of 2 or 3 missions a year, starting in 2018, we will be carrying pieces of an outpost up to the lunar surface and assembling them so that by 2024 you have some sort of probably relatively primitive facility that can support a few people for 180 days or more at a time. the step of using local resources to build things, I think, is a step beyond that.
And do we know anything right now about the biology of human bodies, what might happen after 6 months on the moon in low gravity?
No, we don't. I mean, it's one of the things we can do on the space station is simulate partial gravity for extended periods of time. The moon is 1/6 gravity, and so we need to understand the impact on the body of living in that environment for 6 months or more at a time.
So those first astronauts on the moon in a permanent base are, in a way, Earth's guinea pigs.
Indeed, they are experimental subjects, and they have to know that and volunteer for all the medical testing that will be involved in this. But they're also pioneers, the people that are out ahead of the mass of humanity, doing something very exciting and taking some risks that I think are well worth taking.
And NASA is interested in the practical applications of both resources and having an escape route from the Earth.
That is a major consideration in this initiative. The President's science advisor, John Marburger, said in a speech last spring that this is not really about science, it's about extending the sphere of economic activity into the solar system.
And adding incentive now to get to Mars are photographs of the Martian surface that might show recent frozen water. If the findings are confirmed, NASA says that all the ingredients favorable for life on Mars are in place: liquid water and a stable heat source. Astrobiologist Bruce Jakosky said, quote, "This underscores the importance of searching for life on Mars, either present or past. It's one more reason to think that life could be there," unquote. And Mars might have all the ingredients needed for the next human-populated planet. And Whitley, where this is headed, I do feel that the moon is going to end up being another one of those human populations where people are going to disagree about who goes where and who has what.
Linda, I certainly hope that the moon program turns out to be more useful than the International Space Station has been, which started out with such high hopes and has ended up as basically a smelly tin can in the sky. Not to say that we haven't learned a lot about long-term, how to survive long-term in space, but I don't think we've learned much more than the Russians already knew before the space station was even sent aloft. So, nevertheless, he makes a good point about helium-3, and if it turns out to be as important to fuel in the future as it may be, it could be that there will be more than one permanent station on the moon, and we'll be in a situation with the moon, something like the situation in the Antarctic. We'll see.
Right, with different science bases scattered around in an area where all of them have to get the same energy source, which probably is going to be the South Pole.
Wow. Well, they'll be there for sure, because an energy source as valuable as that, assuming it hasn't all been mined away, and, there's been a certain amount of indication, as we both know, that there have been others up there on the moon from time to time doing some mining, not us. We'll see. Hopefully it's still there in the quantities that we need it. Well, the Mars water thing is simply fascinating, and I think to myself that there have been so many anomalous pictures taken by the landers and the rovers and the orbiters that have been dismissed as one thing or another that looked like plant life. One of them looks like a log. One of them looks like standing water. And they've all been called something else. Now I'm wondering if we shouldn't revisit all of that.
Well, it's fascinating to me how some researchers were so skeptical that any liquid water was responsible for those surface feature changes that have been seen by the Mars observers. And there was the argument that it had to be other materials, such as sand or dust.
Dust. In the case of the standing water, it was dust.
Yeah. And
the log was an unusually shaped boulder.
And even if sand and dust can flow like liquid and look perhaps similar, I think that right now that we are standing on the ground that many other scientists hope, and that would be that water that once was on the surface of Mars, a lot of it may be trapped in icy permafrost, and if so, then getting a human base on Mars, we will not have to go so far and carry so much because the water will be there. We will just have to process it from the permafrost.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for a fascinating and provocative report. Folks, you'd be making a...
And if so, where has your journey taken you, and what did you experience when you were at these places?
My journey has taken me around the world. One of the most amazing places, obviously, is the Rosslyn Chapel. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be very much aware of Rosslyn Chapel because of its significance through the Da Vinci Code. To me, the most amazing thing, though, is not the places that I've been. I've been to Brazil, I've been to South America, to Africa, all through Europe, to Scotland, to the Orkneys. One of the most amazing things, though, that I've experienced is the gentlemen that I've been allowed to meet through the story that I've been telling and through my family connection. Some of these amazing gentlemen, 80 years old, amazing memory for the knowledge that I'm conveying, amazing truth in terms of my family background, and just a kindness that they've demonstrated to me. That, to me, is the real treasure, William.
Would one of these kindly gentlemen, these scholarly gentlemen, happen to bear the surname of Sinclair?
He does indeed. Niven Sinclair has become one of my best friends, and Niven Sinclair has really been the catalyst of this whole story of Prince Henry Sinclair from an old world point of view. Niven himself has become an amazing friend in part because of the story that I've told and brought Prince Henry Sinclair over to the New World. And my new book, Templar Meridian, continues with the story of bringing Prince Henry Sinclair to the interior of North America. And
today, the Knights Templar. Who were they? What were the real secrets of the Templars? The most enduring mystery surrounding the Knights Templar concerns the nature and final resting place of their great treasure. Whereas many believe this lost treasure contains knowledge of the holy bloodline, including the whereabouts of its descendants, William F. Mann shows that it may in part consist of an ancient science developed before the Great Flood, one to guide the Templars in the Holy Land during the Crusades. Still extant in Masonic Templar ritual today, this knowledge enabled the Templar order to establish accurate latitudinal and longitudinal positions long before the 17th century, when the foundations of this geographic science were laid. It is allowed that the Templars crossed the Atlantic, New World, where, led by Prince Henry Sinclair, they established both secret settlements to protect the descendants of the Merovingian dynasty and mining operations that gave them a limitless supply of precious metals and a military edge over their opponents. William Mann, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you, William. Thank you very much.
This is a very exciting adventure that you've embarked upon. Is this your third or your fourth book now about the Templars?
Actually, it's my third book. We started there was my first book, The Labyrinth of the Grail. The second one is The Knights Templar in the New World. And the Templar Meridians, the secret mapping of the New World, is a natural extension of those first two.
Yeah, and this is such a kind of a departure from the usual Templar sort of books that tend to focus more on the Holy Land, or they'll take you to Rennes-le-Château, France, for example, or up to Rosslyn Chapel.
Intermixing them with the native population, the First Nations, the Aboriginals. Because in part the story wouldn't really have continued if it wasn't for this introduction or strategic intermarriages of the Knights Templar that we're talking about around 1400 with the First Nations. So it's really in part a story about the First Nations also of North America.
Yeah, and with that you get into some of the real kind of crevices, if you will, of American history, stuff that's little known. For example, Thomas Jefferson had a very deep and enduring interest in both the secrets of the New World as well as the esoteric secrets of the Old World. And it's something that most Americans simply are not that aware of. But still, we need to just, if you wouldn't mind, William, cover a couple of bases. Let's talk just for a moment more about Henry Sinclair and why understanding his story is so important to a true and accurate understanding of American history.
If you understand the true story of Prince Henry Sinclair at the end of the 14th century was hereditary Grand Master of Knights Templar of Scotland. Now, the Knights Templar of Scotland, for anybody who knows their history around that time, the Knights Templar were the ancestors of those original knights that fought in the First Crusades in the Holy Land. The story goes that they discovered something under the Temple of Solomon, something of immense value, to the point that they were followed or pursued to the ends of the earth by the church and French king. On Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th.
But you're in a very unique position to talk about the Templars, especially their North American connections, because of your family background. Why don't we start there and talk with everybody about how you became interested in the Templars and why you have such unique insight into their treasure and their secrets?
Well, in part, William, it's an interesting story that I continue through my 3 books because it really started with my family background. My great uncle, who was like my grandfather to me because my grandfather had died just prior to me being born, I find out approximately 15 years ago was Supreme Grand Master of Knights Templar of Canada. And it's been conveyed to me since that time that in actual fact he was probably one of the 3 highest-ranking Freemasons in the world. And it was through some of the secrets that he showed to me, unbeknown to myself at the time when I was really quite young, that I've been able to piece together the story and really develop a really interesting tale of daring on behalf of one Prince Henry Sinclair who came to the New World in 1398 AD. But more importantly, it's been a real personal journey. It's allowed me to really piece together a family background that I knew a little bit about. But since the time that I started doing a fair amount of research over the last 15 years, I've really been exposed to a number of things on a variety of levels, which just have simply amazed me on a personal level and from a knowledge point of view.
And I assume you've had an opportunity to travel to some of the Templar locations.
In 1907, it all came together when Prince Philippe the Fair of France made a lightning strike on all the Templars of France. Those Templars dispersed, and legend has it that those Templars were responsible for the Scottish victory over the English at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Now, the interesting thing is that the Sinclairs are intermixed with that history, but just as importantly, they were supposedly the guardians of this ancient knowledge or ancient treasure, which had been transported from the Holy Land, from the First Crusades and the original 9 Knights. And it was Prince Henry Sinclair, when the English were getting too close for comfort, through this ancient knowledge, was able to transport what they considered to be the Holy Grail to the New World, to their new Arcadia, as they viewed it at that point in time, but what in actual fact is present-day Nova Scotia.
So these secrets that came out of the crypt, the repository of secrets beneath Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, made their way to America. You know, it's kind of interesting, William. USA Today and Good Morning America have gotten together to come up with the 7 new wonders of the world. And, of course, the Dome of the Rock is on this list. And so it just seems that for some reason that particular dot of real estate is considered to be sacred not only in the ancient world but continues right up to today. But most people, like American history, just simply do not know the actual history of Jerusalem, of the Holy City, and of the Temple Mount itself. I'm a big fan